Hi everyone. We're going to take a look at how you can use the gradient tool to create a stained glass effect. So we're going to use a combination of settings here. We're going to use the paint bucket, we're going to use the gradient tool and gradient adjustments to make something similar to a stained glass window. If you look at the sample here, stained glass is typically when you see a stained glass window, it typically has, fades of shades of colors just because of the properties of glass and how light passes through the glass. Well, this is something that can be achieved and a similar effect can be created using vector art. So what we have is a basic line art drawing to start with. And part of this process is going to be to fill the gaps in that artwork with a color and then start adding gradients to that object. So first step we're going to do in this process is select the artwork. So what I want you to do is to grab your selection tool and draw a selection box around the entire drawing. One thing to keep in mind is all of these lines strategically, specifically, have been drawn so that they overlap one another. This isn't a individually drawn set of shapes, but instead it's just separate lines. And the strokes are touching, so they overlap. But they're unconnected, so they're not complete closed shapes. So it's not possible to select an area and fill it with a color. If I tried to do that, for example, you would see that you would overlap and collapse and fill in different pieces. That's not what we're trying to do. We need each of these segments to be available for individual color. Another thing, it's kind of subtle, but it is obvious, is that the stroke settings are a little bit different. Some are thick strokes, some are thinner strokes, and that was done on purpose to make them look a little more interesting, to not be the same boring size and shape. Okay, so step one, though, is going to be to prepare the stroke lines so they can accept the paint bucket for adding color. What that means is we need to start by going to the Object menu, and we need to outline all of our strokes. The purpose for that is there's a difference between the way you add color to a stroke and a fill shape. And so by making all of our strokes into shapes, it's going to solidify our artwork and make it easier to add color. The second reason is it's going to preserve the line quality. If you don't do this step, your artwork will be dumbed down to a solid, similar stroke size, and you're going to lose all the character of your individually drawn lines. So again, when you're using the paint bucket, it's always a good idea to take your artwork and outline the strokes first to permanently create those lines. Now, another tip before even doing that would be to use your layer palette and duplicate your line art. So what I like to do is if I've spent a lot of time drawing an illustration like this, I will duplicate that layer. So I'll go to the layer palette and I will select duplicate from the drop down menu. And then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll actually lock the original. I could even change the name, call it original, and then hide it. And then select the copy to work on. This is really useful because these next progressive steps using the color and the outline the stroke is going to permanently alter our lines, so we don't want to lose them. It's always good to keep a copy. So that's what I've done. I've made that copy and now I'm working on the copy layer. So let's proceed. Select all the artwork, go to the Object menu, start with Path, Outline Stroke. Now those shapes are condensed and it's possible to start using my paint bucket to fill. So now I need to look for that paint bucket. So I'm going to come over here to my toolbar, and the Live Paint tool is hidden and connected to the Shape Builder tool. So if you don't see it, it's there in that submenu. Select it. And this is where I can go to my swatch palette and start adding colors. And I can go around the object and randomly start adding those colors in there. Now, something you may not know is with the paint bucket, on your keyboard, if you press your left or right arrow keys, it's going to cycle through the swatches in your swatch palette. So that makes it kind of easy to select different colors just right there from the swatches without having to hunt and peck from the swatch palette itself. So that's going to make that easier. Same thing, if I wanted to do red, I could come in here and add different reds. And fill in the colors pretty quickly with that paint bucket. So I'm not being really careful right now. I'm just kind of going through and randomly picking colors. Might want to spend a little more time with this later if I was going to really mess with it. But to be able to do this little demonstration, I did it kind of quickly. I might in the future be a little more deliberate about which colors I pick. For now at least, all that really matters is that each block has been given a color. Because in the next step, I'm going to need to, let me zoom in and get that little segment. I'm going to need to go through and select individual pieces to be able to change the artwork. Okay, so I think I've got all the little intersections. Okay, now, when I switch to my selection tool, you should see that the border of this object still has the paint object setting. So you always got to remember, when using the paint bucket to fill an object with color, that means it's an editable object. When it's an editable object like that, it's really easy to color with the paint bucket, but it's very hard to do anything else. And your other tools will not react properly with the vector art. So you kind of have to be all in. You finish coloring with the paint bucket, then complete that process before you move on to do any other adjustments. So there it is, all colored in. Now to return and restore this to normal vector art, I need to go to the Object menu, and this is another one of those steps you just can't forget. I need to go to the Object menu, look for Live Paint, and I need to select Expand. Again, this makes the permanent transition back to vector art from a painting art, and it's a necessary step. It'll be pretty easy to notice if you forget this step and you try doing something else with the knife tool or even with some of the other color shading tools. You're going to be like, what's going on? Well, always check this step. Go back and see if your artwork has been expanded. So Object, Live Paint, Expand. Now you can see those little corners on my object return to normal vector art. Now, before I go to any further, like adding gradients to this to give it that little stained glass appearance, I also need to clean up the art a little bit. The resulting artwork from the paint bucket has a lot of little line segments. You see these little overlapping segments? That's a residual from outlining the stroke in the very first step. It's also a residual of adding color using the paint bucket. So to clean that up and make it easier to alter going forward, I need to use the Pathfinder. If you don't see the Pathfinder, go look for it under the Window menu. And what we're going to do is merge the artwork. Merging is going to unite all those separate segments into solid pieces so that we can easily grab and manipulate those individual shapes. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to merge. You can see how it tidied up all those different little separate pieces. Really important step. Alrighty, now what I'm going to do, change to my direct selection tool, and actually, let's try this. I'm going to go to my magic wand, and I'm going to try clicking on a green. Now, when I use that magic wand, what it's supposed to do is click and select greens that are of similar color. But it looks to me like it's picked up a couple shades of green. And I know that because the fill box has a little question mark in it. So that means that it's selecting too many colors at once. That's a tolerance adjustment. So I need to go back to my magic wand, double click it. I need to adjust that tolerance to maybe like 10. Let's change that number from 20 to 10. And let's try again. I may have to deselect first. Okay, still doing it. So let's try 5 then. There we go. That's what I want. So sometimes that magic wand is a little too sensitive and it's selecting too many colors at once. There we go. I've got my green. Now watch what I can do. There are a bunch of useful gradients that are already visible or already made in Illustrator. And to find them, what you do is go to your swatch palette, select the library button in the left corner, go to gradients, and here I can find pre-made color gradients already ready to go. So I'm going to look for foliage. That sounds like a garden item. So let's do that. Okay, so there's some greens. That's good. So watch this. If I click one of those greens, it throws in that color in all of those selected shapes. Now watch what happens if I use the gradient tool on it. And I drag a new direction. No, that was a mistake. See, each of these has their own gradient bar. If I want to change their direction, I need to select them individually first. So that way each one could have a slightly different direction with that gradient. That just makes it a little more interesting, looks a little less computer generated when the gradients aren't all pointed the same direction. So let's try that again. Go back to the magic wand, click on similar greens, pick a different green swatch this time with a new gradient. See how they're in a different opposing direction? I can then use my direct selection tool, the gradient tool, change gradient directions. Make sure they're independent of one another so they look a little different. Okay, let's hunt for a new section. Green, this time maybe I'll go with a darker one. How about that one? Yeah. There we go. Change the direction. Now I don't see any red in here, so I'm going to go back to the library button and look for a red gradient. Maybe fruits and vegetables will have one. Let's go in there. Yeah. So magic wand, click some reds. Try a reddish gradient. Yeah, now we're getting somewhere. Direct selection tool, gradient tool, and I can adjust some of these individually so they have a little more of a unique direction. So that's a pretty simple process for taking your solid color art, adjusting it, outlining the stroke, using the paint bucket to fill in your shape colors, then expanding the artwork, don't forget to do that, and then start using individual gradients in individual color segments to tune up your art and give it more of that stained glass appearance. Alright, so hopefully that helps. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.